Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Galler. I am a virtual production supervisor and producer and original founder of Lux Machina, and currently hold the role of CTO of NEP Virtual Studios. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to be a virtual production supervisor. And why don't you guys tell me who you are?
I'm Jason Bayever. I'm the director of virtual production for Lux Machina. My history is coming from visual effects, where I worked on feature films and TV, and then also ride films for theme parks, and then I moved into virtual production a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I'm Kristin Turnipseed. I am a virtual production supervisor. I don't wear as many hats as Phil, but virtual production supervisor at Lux Machina. And I also, within the NEP Virtual Studios family, was a virtual production stage supervisor at Halon Entertainment prior to Lux.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So today we're going to talk a little bit about both the creative and technology approaches to virtual production supervising and how it's different, I think, from VFX. And Jason, you have quite a bit of experience in that realm. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience and a little bit of what you've learned as you adapt to the changing world of virtual production?
Yeah. So the world of virtual production has opened up. There's the obvious of like the green screen removal, right? So anybody who's done compositing, anybody who's done visual effects has dealt with green screen spill all over the place, green screen spill around you, lighting issues of being put into the environment. So as we progress, as rendering technology gets better on the virtual production spaces and we're able to use more and more for Final Pixel, this is just going to get better and better. In the meantime, for certain environments, it can be used for, at worst, just lighting, and that is a huge step up over previous ways of doing things, and then also for backgrounds and all these other things. So it's making the life easier. It's making the quality of the visual effects coming out significantly better. And then, it's just going to continue to get better. It's on a very fast trajectory up.
Awesome. And just so we know kind of some of the stuff you've done in the past, can you give me some examples of some of the projects you might have worked on? I don't know what you can tell us, but whatever you could tell us. Maybe give us some context of what the VFX work you had been involved in and the sort of the scope of some of it.
Sure. So I worked at Rhythm & Hughes for 13 years, and then I worked at Imagineering for 5 years. So at Rhythm & Hughes, I did about 15 different feature film projects, starting with Cats and Dogs, X-Men 2, Yogi Bear, one of my favorites. I was on Life of Pi for 2 years, and then also Percy Jackson to cap off that job. Also did Game of Thrones there, and then at Imagineering, I did a lot of sort of the ride film stuff for Star Wars and Marvel rides that were put on the large format on the LED screens and projection and stuff like that.
So I think this has been a pretty large shift, right, in both scope but also approach to real-time technology. And so actually, I'm going to throw it to you, Kristin. I'd love to hear similar, what you worked on, where you come from. I think your background's in previs and visualization, and obviously joined Lux coming from Halon earlier this year, and have been helping us solve virtual production problems. And I know you have a lot of experience as well with things like simulcam, but I'd love to hear some of the experience and what it's been like making that leap over to supervising.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the superpowers that we've got at Lux is that we've got people from VFX backgrounds. My background is in previs. And so I like to think, previs is virtual production, and I've been doing that for a number of years. So virtual production in its infancy, I feel like I'm a veteran at this point. But no, it does bring a different perspective, because in previs we're often solving a whole plethora of issues that creatives might have, whether they're trying to find the tone or feel of the cameras in a film, if they've got tech viz that they're trying to do, or just trying to work out story elements and beats for a shoot. There's a whole lot of things that we're trying to solve in previs that translate really well to virtual production, because a lot of our work, being done in in Unreal, it helps bring those concepts into virtual production very fluidly, right? There's a really nice handshake. And a lot of my most recent experience at Halon was working in virtual camera for the upcoming Zemeckis Pinocchio, because there's a couple of Pinocchios coming out. For that, and we did virtual camera all through previs. all through, we did some tech viz, and then on the other side, we did final cameras in the engine where we were able to get like an A camera operator in the engine working on wheels to pull out final cameras. So like bringing that practical filmmaking skill set into virtual production was really very, very cool. And, kind of approaching it from more of like a ground up, from the storytelling perspective in virtual production, I think also then brings kind of those solutions onto the stage.
Awesome. Well, and a little bit about me. So I actually come from a theatrical lighting background, as well as live TV, show programming, and then transitioned into opening Lux around the idea that we could create more realistic lighting and in-camera visual effects solutions. I think similar to like what Jason said, really sometimes the worst case is that you get to use this tool for lighting, and I think lighting is such an important part of what we're trying to solve. So I often am falling back to my roots on theatrical lighting and the best way to provide lighting solutions. I think one of the really cool things about what we're able to do now is start to look at lighting as a real-time solution where it would have maybe been done in post in certain cases. Taking the approach of relighting and doing it in real time, more seamless integration with compositing tools. I think it's a lot of where the future is headed with this. And I think it's a really unique opportunity to take a look at how we can grow as, I think, collaborators and storytellers, right, through the use of some of these tools, and specifically around the idea of, final compositing and integration. I think ultimately is the goal, whether it's an LED wall or not, right? It's about creating that integrated look that sells the story, right, and sells a final frame. Yeah. So actually, with that, I know talk a little bit about lighting. But like Jason, I think you can maybe tell us a little bit more about how Lux has used their light card tools. And I know there's a couple of specifics, and of course, Kristin, feel free to jump in as well. But maybe you could talk to me a little bit about what's a light card, what does it mean, what do we do that's unique, and why is this important for production?
Sure. So when you put up an environment, let's say it's an Unreal environment, and you put it out there, it's not okay, let me take a step back. When you put a character on set, you're going to hero light that character. You're going to light that character into some sort of environment. So if a human is standing on a set, you have to still have separate lights out there. You can't just put a Unreal environment and say that, oh, look, they're fully integrated and it's perfect. Your DP is going to want to have control over every aspect of everything in there. So there's this concept of light cards where you put up pieces of 3D geometry that have, because it's an LED stage, it's emissive. You can put up light cards of any color and get them in the place that you want it. So the DP has creative freedom within the volume to light whatever's on there, whether it's set pieces or whether it's people, whether it's all of that stuff, to get that level of integration. So what we've done also is we've expanded that. So we put things like gradients and animated texture maps and all kinds of things on it so that there's ultimate control. You can put, you can put different color temperatures on it. You can scale them up. You can put them in areas. And you can even do the opposite of that, is that just simply make it black so that you're reducing bounce and you're reducing the light going on that side. So there's a lot of, it just gives the DP and it gives the creatives ultimate control over what they want to do.
If you don't mind, and I think one of the cool things about that is that there's a lot of different ways to use this, right? You combine the use of light cards with practical lighting, and then, depending on what the DP is looking for, there's multiple ways to approach what they're wanting. That way, whatever flexibility, not only do they have options and choices, but there's often flexibility in how we approach the use of these light cards and the flexibility that some of the tools allow to be able to, kind of get some of this light in either with or without, affecting the environment. I mean, you might not want that on the environment. You might. Who knows? Like, that's up to the DP. So it allows this like freedom of creative choice when you're on the stage, and this flexibility.
Well, and I think that it's a much more theatrical approach, right? The idea that we can put textures in and get a little bit of dappling, right, and get a little bit of motion that isn't just from the scene, but also is able to be carved out in a unique way, right? Whether it is the absence of light, right, which is so important, especially I know coming from VFX, like how much you deal with shadow, right, and how shadow crafts the way a narrative is told. And I think that same approach should be used in the volume. And I think it's really interesting to hear some of those techniques are actually making their way into real time. talk a little bit, Kristin, about if you could about some of your work in VCam, especially your work at Halon. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you approach VCam on set, and then we'll jump back to a question for Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could talk about VCam for hours, so please cut me off when we're done. I mean, the really cool thing about VCam, especially for in this particular use case, there's a lot of filmmakers that like to have options, right, in the editing room. VCam, like, we're able to just get a cut together so quickly, right? We put a camera in a filmmaker's hands. They don't need to know as much about Unreal. They can have whatever control they want. And at Halon, we were able to kind of build like bespoke tools to allow the director, the VFX supervisor, to have as much or as little control as they wanted, and have an operator kind of take over the rest of it. Not only that, we did this thing fully remote, so I got to be in my office at home, while the director's in his office, 50 miles away, and 40 other people on Zoom. So it was really cool. It was a very flexible tool that we were able to utilize for environment reviews, right? To review what the VAT is working on through the lens, through the camera that is going to be shot with. We were able to do animation reviews and just kind of preliminarily put cameras on that animation. How does it work? Are we going too far? Are we going too fast? Are we out of bounds? Can we add extras, casting, all the way up until, in all the meantime, we're taking shots, so we're putting together an edit. All the way up until we get to the stage, and then with all that data and with the camera, we're able to put that in the hands of the DP and kind of play around with some lighting. We were able to put it in the hands of a production designer and work out, what the set extension was going to look like through simulcam, right? So we had a volume on the side of the stage that, production designer could come in and say, all right, well, here's where the camera's going to be. Do we need to move some of these buildings so that when we frame for them, we've got a really nice set extension? And then that environment was able to go, onto the stage. Answering questions like, is this technocrane, these cameras work with the technocrane? So very technical questions. And then if not, we had the volume right there so they could practice out, all right, well, what do we want? Instead of going out with the, on the technocrane, they could come into the volume, shoot a camera, and then we could run that through the TechViz tool and see if it would work on the technocrane as well. And then they had a template for what to shoot when they're out there and you're paying for very expensive actors. You don't want to be testing these kinds of things then. So we were able to do all that, and we were able to do that while we were occupying the stage, right? Like, this is in between live takes and such. So that was incredibly helpful. And then again, kind of going into finals, like to be able to bring the skills of a professional, like a camera operator, into the virtual world, and he had no experience in Unreal or in virtual games. He wasn't even a gamer. We showed him how to use an Xbox controller to move things around, but put a device in his hand that felt comfortable, and a wheels device, and allow him to bring his skills into the virtual world in a way that was comfortable and with very little like ramp up time and a little bit of training. That goes a long way towards making a really great film at the end, because it's now cameras that match what was shot on stage, the live action plates too. You've got that cohesive camera storytelling. It was really cool.
It's awesome. Well, and I think as both your roles have shifted to be a little more ICVFX, what excites you? What types of projects and supervising elements are you more involved in? What's exciting about that, and how has that affected both of your approaches to production? I know for me, it's been really exciting seeing sort of this evolution of, I think, standardization and concepts around producing and supervising become a little bit more ubiquitous, which has been really exciting. But I'd love to hear from you guys what your approach is and how it's changed a little bit now that maybe you're doing a little less simulcam and more in-camera VFX. And Jason, for you, coming from VFX into in-camera VFX and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I think what really excites me is that we're still in our infancy and that we're growing and we're still developing a lot of the technologies and the workflows and all of those things around virtual production. So it feels to me, not necessarily in a negative way, but in a very positive way, like very early visual effects. When you started in visual effects, there was no such thing as ray tracing. Everybody nowadays, you put a sphere in an environment, you throw an HDRI in, and it looks beautiful, right? Back in the good old days, when I was young, we had to like literally throw, if you wanted a bounce light, you had to put a second light in your scene to bounce. If you were next to a yellow wall, you had to put a yellow light next to it. There was no ray tracing, there was no bouncing. You had to look at the scene, you had to break down that scene and make it look real, and it took a lot of effort and work to do it, and then it was building those pipelines around all of that effort and around all of that, and sort of the same thing in virtual production. It's so young in its infancy that we're developing all the workflows and all the structures and all the looks and all of the ways to get the results. And it's the R&D and the digging into those problems and problem solving, that's really what gets me excited about this, and that you can actually help shape the future of what virtual production is because it's so young right now. And also the fact that there's so much actual technology around it, tying all of that together is just, that's what gets me up in the mornings.
Yeah, and I would suppose for me, like one of my challenges, which it's one I take on happily, is kind of coming from this fully CG world, right? All the tangible aspects and the hardware that goes into virtual production, right? Things like, gen lock and time code and cables and all of these, and the panels, like learning leaps and bounds of these. These aren't necessarily things we interact with on a regular basis on previs. So kind of getting into that, but also in learning a lot of that, you kind of then touch on further aspects, understand a little bit more of how this on-set technology works. And for me, it helps enable me to be able to communicate to filmmakers, right? Like I think all of us have had the experience of trying to translate what the technology is, the goals of it, how to use it, to filmmakers who aren't as familiar with it, and I don't think any of us would expect, any of them to automatically know all the behind the scenes stuff. That's our job. Our job is, kind of be that translator. And so, kind of coming into the more tangible aspects of it, being able to, really interact with all these things, it helps me better understand, so then I can better, communicate back to the filmmakers and kind of be that intermediary, in a full capacity, which is really helpful.
Well, you've actually both hit upon a really interesting note, which is it's a lot of it is about the interaction, right, and the tools and shaping sort of the future. And I think I'd like to dive a little bit more into actually what some of those tools are. I know and sort of the specifics around how they help improve the workflow, and it's sort of what sets us apart a little bit, I think, and how we view that workflow. So I think Jason, you've been in now at this point like a dozen volumes, I imagine, many volumes, and I know that one of the things that has plagued us has been dealing with reconfigurable volumes. We have volumes that have ceiling pods, volumes that have moving fins, volumes that have moving plugs. Can you talk to me about some of the things that have come out of those ideation sessions and realizations that we struggle with that, and what have we put in place to help solve, maybe with like ceiling pods, for example?
Sure. So on our facility, which Phil in a previous panel up here spoke about, which is our new Trilla facility, we have a very flexible ceiling built into our Trilla facility, and we have ceiling pods that can move around and be reconfigured depending on what your needs are. If you want to use it as a car process stage, you can bring it down, you can curve it around the car if you want. There's just a variety, and it's very flexible and amazing. But with that comes a little difficulty within the engine, because you have to match all of those ceiling pods. They have to be exactly in the right place, or your end display is not going to work properly, especially when you start shooting up. So all of that has to be matched and in engine and correctly. And if in order to be on a shoot, it has to be done quickly. You can't sit there and go, oh, I'm going to take half a day every time we move these pods to measure it and laser it and all of these things. So we're developing tools to solve these problems, whether it's metering the motors or, for set pieces that are on set, we'll LiDAR it and match it in. And we have trace tools to match things. So like, let's say you have train tracks that go practical into virtual, so they match when you move your camera around. They look connected. They don't look disconnected in certain ways. And if your pieces are slightly off, if you're a little bit off in engine, like that's not going to match up. So we have trace tools within engine to fix that. We are looking at the motors to see when the motors move it up into getting that information back into Unreal so that it matches. So there's a variety of tools that we're developing around this concept.
And I think one of the cool things about those tools is that, like, having tools like that available, that's not necessarily something we're going to go to filmmakers and say, like, this is how this tool works, and it'll break the end display. No, it allows us a lot of flexibility to be able to address what the filmmakers want.
It's a common language, right?
Exactly. And so, like, even if these are not tools that the filmmakers are directly interacting with, these are still tools that benefit them, because it allows our artists, it allows our teams to be able to react and respond quickly and accurately, to be able to get these things to provide that level of flexibility. So there's a lot of, like, hidden and invisible tools that are built and devved, and we absolutely love them, and they're fantastic. And without them, we wouldn't be able to be as effective in a lot of ways. And these just allow us to address those wants and needs.
And it
better.
prevents production delays. They want to do something.
Absolutely.
They're paying. There's a very high burn rate on set of people just standing around when you're doing things. So we want to eliminate that.
Yeah.
And I know she's not up here, but Julia Liu, who is standing behind the team over there, helped build some of these tools, especially at Leavesden, where we manage the V stage. And again, configurable pods. And it was a ideation session around some of that work that led to the innovations in that space.
Well, and I think, like, the innovation is continuing too, right? The more and more filmmakers pick up these tools, the more they might come to us and say, well, can we do this? And then, like,
Exactly.
from there, it's like, well, give me a moment. Let's go see if we have this tool, and if we don't, we'll build it.
Yeah,
Which,
exactly.
like you mentioned, like, Julia's been running a lot of building, that kind of stuff. We have tons of other people, right? But, like, the ideas for these tools not only come from us, but they also come from the filmmakers, so that we can quickly address, whatever new things. And the more filmmakers pick this kind of technology up and start filming in this way, the more ideas will come. That, we can't think of everything. We try to. When we don't think of everything, we need the filmmakers to kind of give us this input, because these are ultimately tools that will help them, right? And we don't want to build tools that aren't going to be useful. So having that input is valuable.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on one more tool, then maybe we can talk about some of the techniques we use as supervisors. I think one of the things I think is for me, I come from lighting, theatrical lighting, deal a lot with DMX. Very early on, we're having to implement complex DMX workflows inside Unreal, and that's evolved into an array of tools that allow us to very quickly deal with film-specific projects, such as having hundreds of sky panels with multiple cells. How quickly can you patch them? How quickly can you address them? How do you draw to them? How do you pixel map them? How do you rearrange those canvases? Some of that is built into Unreal at this point, although there's a legacy here that it predates that. But even still, what we've done is we've modified those tools now to allow us to be significantly faster. We can patch 300 or 400 fixtures in a matter of seconds in a number of arrays that are incredibly fluid and flexible for things like sky panels that might have multiple modes of operation or being used in unique ways. And this is exactly like you guys are saying, right? It's a response to the filmmaker's need to be, flexible, fast, production-proof, right? In some cases, and understanding that ultimately, I think to call it back to the beginning, a lot of this is actually about lighting integration and making something look cohesive, right? It's a compositing problem, not just a environmental problem. Like a bad environment is a bad environment. A bad environment that has really good compositing on top of it might be acceptable. A really good environment that is composited terribly is terrible, right? And there is no way around that, right? And I think it's a really important thing to recognize that these tools are really to help us build out a suite of functionality around enabling supervisors to have the conversation about how do we composite something properly on stage, and how do we actually make that look good, right? And the goal, at least for me, right, is that when I walk up to a monitor, I want to go, yeah, that looks real, right? And if it doesn't look real, I immediately know there's a problem and I have to figure it out, and then got to go down the track of figuring out what the problem is. But before we move on, you guys have anything else to add about some of these tools?
Yeah, I did want to point out Lux just has over 30 tools, and all of our tools come from our experiences on stage. And I just want to emphasize, I think both Phil and Kristin hit on this, but with Julia being on stage for so long and Jason being on stage, those are two of our virtual production supervisors are standing back there, and Kristin and me and Phil and our entire company, these tools are developed from productions, and they've essentially been quote unquote rapid prototyped on set to solve a problem that was on set on the day, fixed, developed, cleaned up, put back into rotation as fully usable tools. And I think that's an important thing. They're all based on experiences to make everybody's around us lives easier.
Exactly. I think that's that's great. I mean, I think for me, one of the things I think is fundamental is that we're really trying to empower storytellers, right? Like it's this idea that you go into a space, and whether it's an LED volume or it's a practical set with set extension and simulcam or it's character integration, right? You are really trying to help storytellers see their vision and actually bring that to life, right? And hopefully in front of their eyes. And when it's not in front of their eyes in real time, hopefully in a way that allows it to be more tangible so they can make more creative decisions sort of on the day. And I think, a lot of VFX has gotten away from this. I think, Jason, you've sort of been involved in a lot of these processes, which is fix it in post, right? And now we want to move that forward and actually get back to, I think, what the roots of storytelling are, which is this idea that we're going to do and make creative decisions together collaboratively in a space where that decision is meaningful and impactful, right? So for you guys, what and how do you approach supervising? What's a conversation with the director like? What and how do you change the script when you run into problems that normally you would fix in post, but now you're trying to fix right now?
I think that's also the same thing, like continuing that conversation around tools. I mean, obviously the first thing you do, you would talk to the director, the DPs, see what their expectations are on set, what they want, where they want to go, what they want on the day of shoot, what kind of controls they want. But the fix it in post thing is, I mean, it's the age-old joke in right in visual effects, but these tools actually help us not fix it in post, if you will. It's fix it now because it's real time, it's live, it's in front of you, and if there's a problem, let's try to fix it so that they don't have to fix it in post. And I think that's a big key to how we work. Obviously, there's always going to be some fix in post. You move the camera somewhere, it's a great shot, you get everything perfect, but there's a little bit of moire. Fine, you're going to have to do a little paint out. You hit a little bit of, the motion capture camera is in a reflection, you're going to have to paint it out. But as far as like the bigger things, you want to be able to actually fix it live. You want to fix it in front of them, and you want to get an understanding of what they want to see and how they want to fix it and how they want to work, because everybody's going to want to work differently.
Yeah, I 1,000,000% agree. I would say that there is one caveat to this, is that that these conversations, hopefully we're having them well in advance of the shoot day, right? There is a level of when you're on set, we have tons of flexibility with what we can do and all of these tools to be able to provide that. However, we would prefer to have these conversations well in advance. What are you going to want to control? If you don't know, that's fine. We can help you kind of guide you towards that. But if there is something specific you're going to want to be able to control, the more in advance we know, the better we can prepare. Not only, VADs can prepare the environment, we can prepare our tools, we can prepare our artists to be able to quickly react to those things so that when we're on set, we're not burning any time. So like the whole, kind of set of conversations well in advance to try to address, what do you want, so that we can then, approach this ahead of time. And so that's kind of the biggest thing. And then as well, if there's any sort of like trepidation or concerns about the technology and what they want, we want to be able to have conversations, maybe come in and test out some of these tools and see if that's something you like. Different filmmakers have varying levels of comfortability, comfort levels with technology interaction, and because this is all very highly technical, we definitely don't want to alienate anyone. So, if you want to have that, you want to have an iPad or a control in your hands with all your buttons, cool, we can give that to you. You don't want any of that. You want that to be controlled by, one of us or, someone on set. Awesome. If your DP wants those controls, great. We can customize that experience on set, with a little bit of advanced prep and knowledge, so that we can make it as pleasant of an experience as possible. I mean, shooting in virtual production is very fun anyway, so it's already going to be a great experience. But whatever your comfort level is, you don't have to be a tech guru to be able to utilize this. We can definitely bring that for you.
Well, I think these are all really great points, and I know we're spending a lot of time focusing on film, right? But I think I want to pivot a little bit into how does this also apply in live events and corporate? And I think, Jason, you had the opportunity, I think, to be on the Fox Upfronts this year, and actually maybe Kristin, you as well. I don't know, but I know, Jason, that was it's an XR stage, but also a set extension, which is a version of augmented reality. I know, Kristin, you can talk a lot about simulcam, which is also an augmented reality technique. I'd like to hear from you, Jason, a little bit about what the experience of being on something like Fox is, what the difference is between, you come from filmmaking and narrative storytelling to corporate branding and agency work, and how does the technology apply there? How are they getting uses out of it, and what was different about that for you?
Sure. So it's a very different group of people you're working with, a different level of creatives that are used to a faster paced environment. So we do, as Lux, as Phil mentioned, we do a lot of pop-up work. So we did 2 jobs. One was, Fox, which we did the upfronts for them, and we put up a stage. We got tracking in there. We got environments from a VAD, put it up on stage. We did set extension on that. So whenever the stage ended, is where our extension began. So you blend into that. So it's VCam, but without the green screen, right? So you're literally putting somebody into that environment. And then a lot of them, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on those types of on those types of shoots too. If you think there's a lot on movies, there's a way more with agency work and these types of things. So you have to be adaptable, and you have to work quickly, and and it's live too. So in those kinds of environments, it's much harder to do hey, we need 24 hours notice to get the VAD work integrated. It's more like, hey, we're getting a new delivery in 10 minutes. Can you get that up on the wall for us, and can we shoot it? And Ben Love was our senior operator on that job, and he masterfully got that stuff up and running super quickly for them, got in there, made material changes. It was just very rapid prototyping, and what you get out of that is also it's final pixel at that point also, because it's not necessarily the same level of quality. You're not putting them in photoreal environments. You're putting them into stylized look environments that are more for like marketing type things. And then we also did another one that was Karate Combat, which was also very similar to it. And, that was also a very sort of stylized environment. It was the same environment. It's tracked. It's in there. And that was a live event that was live recorded. The Fox Upfronts was recorded later. They did a couple takes of it. They did multiple cameras and, went off to editorial. This one was live. So when you have live, you have to have redundancy. You have to be ready for something going wrong. These are very complicated systems that run these walls, and there's a lot of things can possibly go wrong. And also on the Karate Combat, we had camera switching. So if in a live event, if you've done broadcast, you know that they want to do multiple cameras, and they're like, have it here, and then you want to live switch, and it has to be instant. And when you're talking about a camera frustum up on the wall, that live switch has to be instant. It has to be on the frame, and it has to go out there, because if it's not, you'll get a delay there, or you'll get a delay somewhere in the system, and it'll look weird when they physically switch the camera, and then your background doesn't switch till 2-3 frames later. And so, we've developed these systems to do these live camera switchings, plugging into with the broadcast truck, so they're getting it out there and everything's working. So there's a wide variety of things, and all of our tools also, going back to tools for a second, are developed for these types of workflows. They're not just film and TV. They're for pop-ups. They're for live switching shows. They're for broadcast. They're for awards shows. I mean, you go down the list of everything, and it's all the things that we cover.
Well, and actually, I think both those shows, really interesting, included set extension, right? Which is the blending of, in this case, on the LED and physical set, blending of augmented reality graphics into the real world. And I know, Kristin, we talk a lot about simulcam and how simulcam often can be character integration, but also set extension. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about maybe what the difference between, there's some semantics around augmented reality and what's simulcam versus AR and what's AR versus set extension. The reality is it's all augmented reality, right? It's all a front plate, right? But I'd love to hear about, what your experience there is and why maybe there's some language differences and language barriers between these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the use of kind of this mixed reality kind of umbrella. I mean, fundamentally it is all kind of, pretty much the same thing. A lot of my, simulcam experience comes also in film, but it's very applicable to these like live events and kind of preparing now for even like a live show event with a live audience. Kind of, a lot of the principles are quite the same. The differences in film, it's a little bit more like a marathon. In live events, it's a sprint. And it's very, very fast. But, kind of bringing these things to, to live events, there's a level of needing to be nimble, as Jason had mentioned. You need a level of redundancy. These are very complicated systems. But what it does also bring is this really cool factor of like visual interaction, right? You can, you can set up a project and like with Karate Combat, you're setting up a whole set extension that goes, it's not really there. So the space that you need isn't as large. You can make adjustments here and there. You can just get something that's like neo-Paris, like neo-futuristic Paris. It doesn't exist. And, to be able to like have that level of flexibility to bring that to your show is really cool, and I think it's a lot of fun to watch these shows, whether it's a live competition show or if it's like an awards show, some sort of broadcast, and especially now having, gone through the pandemic, when people don't want to travel, you can kind of just bring that in and like put yourself in whatever world you want, with some planning. You can kind of bring that element in, and it doesn't have to be as complex of a thing. You can have as much or as little practical set as you want to integrate that. It's really work with all of it. It's really just a matter of taking the principles that we would use on film, paring it down to its like core parts, and then being able to execute it hopefully at the snap of a finger, but and plan for when it doesn't work out like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's really interesting sort of segue into, you said it's a sprint versus a marathon. I think we also have to look at that approach when we talk about rendering technologies, right? One of the things that I think we've been doing that's really interesting, and I know, probably you guys know a little bit as well, of course, is using some of the features that are built into the engine, but also adding some of our own features that are incorporated from NVIDIA. So, using things like TAUU, right, dynamic upscaling, things like DLSS and DXGI, and using these techniques inside our clusters. It's not only relevant for film work, right, where those might allow us to push the quality bar higher at 24 frames a second, but also when we're doing these live events that demand 60 frames a second, or in some cases 120 frames a second, the quality may not be achievable at photorealism, but we can hit that 60 frames a second, right? And I think it's sort of this convergence of art and technology to enable what I call multi-vertical workflows, right? Which is film, broadcast, episodic, live TV, whatever it is, right? At corporate, right? But it's not just how do we build tools and how do we deal with the art. It's what technologies do we have to incorporate into the hardware to enable us to push those boundaries, and how do we do that? It's just one of the things that I've always been passionate about is what can we apply and what technologies can we start to leverage. And those are, I think, just a few examples of that. But I mean, I'd love to hear from you guys sort of to wrap up before we go into Q&A, like any thoughts on how technology, tools, and art are coming together to further some of this stuff? And then, what excites you guys about the future?
Yeah, so I think you covered a lot of what I'm excited about the future. I mean, previously, covered the pipeline side of it, but really, my heart lies in rendering, lighting, rendering, all of that stuff. That's what I love doing. I love the look development and all of that. So I'm really excited about real-time rendering and how good it can get moving forward. Like, I really want to see that get to the point where you can do those photoreal environments, whether it's hardware and software or both combined together, and different tools. I mean, there are just different companies coming out with amazing stuff at this conference, and to see how that all progresses and integrates into the virtual production world and quickly, that's what excites me. Like, I want this to be photoreal. I want us to be able to get stuff up there that's gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I also I'm really looking at just kind of a whole package. Like, we're always chasing that like 1 or 2 extra FPS, just however much we can squeeze out. And so I'm really liking what's coming out of like the engine as far as like environment optimizations, more efficient lighting systems, even within an engine, not only for like the real-time rendering, but then also in a visualization, right? Because you want to be as flexible, and especially working in VCam, where you've got kind of this real-time element before you're going in front of your your film. You're looking for those couple extra FPS, right? Whether that's from the engine, or if it's from optimization, or in a lot of cases, or in my case, we were doing this fully remote VCam. We had to test out different remote access systems, because even just some of those, came with an FPS hit that just was not able to work for us. So just finding, seeing what's coming out as far as, like I said, with like Nanite and Lumen and Unreal, We have with UE5 just finding ways to optimize. That combined with everything else, whether it's hardware, software, where we can just squeeze out more optimization to be able to work faster and more fluidly. That's all really cool stuff that I'm very excited to see.
And anti-aliasing. I would
Yeah.
love anti-aliasing.
Well, what a great way to end. We all want anti-aliasing. Well, I think we'd like to open up to any questions about sort of creative supervising or the technology and tools we're using. I don't know if there's any questions, but love to answer them.
We've answered all the questions.
We nailed it. Well, thank you very much to ETC and AWS and of course Eric and the gang here. Thank you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
And I got to be stoked because you guys have worked on so much of the stuff that I've been out there working on. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, she's literally on stage on both of them.
I was too, and so was Phil, actually. So
Yeah?
while I was still back at Halon, this was like, 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, we were working on an ETC project.
Yep,
and
ripple effect.
absolutely. And little
you're-
did we know, all these years later, we'd all be right here.
Yeah, back on the stage with Fathead.
Exactly.
Yeah, right
yep.
out there.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's very cool, and it's cool to see how far things have come since then. I think while we're all kind of learning about while virtual production is still developing, what we knew then and versus what we know now, it has changed a lot. So even though we're coming up here to explain things to others who might not know as much, we were there too at one point and just trying to figure it out, what works best and what doesn't. So it definitely is this growth and learning process, and I think a handful of years from now, hopefully we'll all be back here again and we'll look back at this being like, we didn't know what we didn't know. And it's always one of those.
I kind of feel like we've moved from Commodore 64 to an Atari. I'm playing a little bit of Pitfall here, but we're on our way to Super Nintendo and beyond. So I think this world has just a huge amount of opportunity. And the other comparison I like to say is this is a lot like DCI, the original version of DCI or digital cinema. It wasn't always as good as it could have been. But look at where we're at now. I mean,
It's about
just
baby
needs some
steps,
time.
right?
Baby
It's about baby steps and improvement and acknowledging that we're in an infancy and that we need to, you got to feed it to get it to grow, right? And that takes a lot of work. And I know it's something, obviously, you and I talked about, but you spend a lot of time on, right? And I think that's a huge part of this is the growth. And we will look back 2 years from now and go, man, we didn't know anything back then, right? And I know, I get the opportunity to learn every day, and I want everyone to be doing that.
Well, yeah, and to be humble enough to approach it like sitting here now. We don't know what we don't know right now, and to be able to sit here and say there are things we don't know and admit that now just kind of sets us up for being ready to make those steps in the future, right? Because then you're looking out for all right, what do I not? What am I missing? What can improve? What can be better? Instead of sitting here saying, "Yep, we've solved virtual production. We're all done." I don't think anyone wants to. I don't think any of us have that mindset, and that keeps us open for that level of growth.
And if there's one thing we're really strong at, it's humility. We're very good at being humble.
It's a superpower, though.
It's a superpower.
It really is.
It's a superpower. All right. Thank you guys so much. Just awesome having you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.